Yeah, thank you so much, everybody. Welcome, welcome. Thanks for being here. I'm Mike Wendt. I'm the program director at Woodland Pattern here in Milwaukee, where I am. Um, and we're all so grateful to be able to host Dunya Mikhail and Mai Der Vang for a second evening now. Um, Before we get started, I'd like to begin this evening by saying that we at Woodland Pattern acknowledge that in Milwaukee, we live and work on traditional Potawatomi, Ho-Chunk, and Menominee homelands along the southwest shores of Michigami, part of North America's largest system of freshwater lakes, where the Milwaukee, Menominee, and Kinnickinnic rivers meet, and the people of Wisconsin's sovereign Anishinaabe, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Oneida, and Mohican nations remain present. We further acknowledge the grave evil colonialism introduced to these lands through genocide as well as slavery, but also via racist and xenophobic beliefs, laws, and practices that continue to inflict harm upon Black, Brown, and Indigenous lives. We honor those who have lived and do live now at these intersections of identity and experience, and are committed to the active dismantling of white supremacy. Um, many thanks to Dunya Mikhail and Mai Der Vang for joining us last night and this evening. We had a remarkable conversation last night, and this evening we'll give a reading, which is just fantastic. Very excited, and of course, thanks to all of you. Have to thank also the National Endowment for the Arts and the Wisconsin Arts Board for generous support of these programs. And these programs that happened last night, a conversation, and this evening, a reading, are part of a larger series, the First Function of Poetry, a social justice series. That larger series has been running now for a little over a year and will just kind of continue somewhat indefinitely at this point. We'll keep hosting events in the series. We're going to pause for the summer as we'll begin hosting a limited run of outdoor in-person readings. So if you're here in Milwaukee, the first of these is going to be July 10th at 3 p.m. an afternoon reading in Garden Park. That's in River West on Locust and Bremen Street. There'll be more about that on our website, but it's going to be, there are featured readers, an open mic, and a bunch of other related activities that will all happen outdoors safely, and but also in person, which is going to be wonderful. More immediately, I hope that you'll consider joining us next Thursday, a week from today. That's May 27th at 7 p.m. Central, for a virtual reading that will feature former U.S. Poet Laureate Juan Felipe Herrera, along with incoming and outgoing Wisconsin Poets Laureate Dasha Kelly Hamilton and Margaret Rosga, respectively. So it's a laureates party next Thursday at 7 p.m. I'm going to share the first of 3 links, so you know how many links to expect from me. This is just our website, where on the homepage, you'll find more about upcoming events, including that reading next week, as well as those that will be happening over the summer will be up soon. And look forward to seeing you all virtually, in person, whatever you're comfortable with, and whatever the occasion calls for. We have books for sale currently in our online bookshop by Dunya and Mai Der. So please visit us online, and I'll share that link. That's the online book center, and in particular, it's a page for that's related to either recent or upcoming events. So that's where you'll find books by the 2 poets this evening. Starting June 1st, you can visit us in the store. We're going to resume store hours. So if that's something you're interested in and comfortable with, come see us. It's also very exciting. So beginning to resume some normal activities here. Look forward to seeing you. So finally, before we get underway, I do want to say that as a nonprofit organization, your individual support goes a long way towards sustaining us and helping us continue what we're doing. With this in mind, we're presenting our events on a give what you can basis. And if you're in a position to give, I hope that you might consider doing so. I'm going to share now a give what you can sort of ticket link. And whatever support is possible, we're deeply grateful for, and mostly we're just grateful for you being here and sharing this space with us. There will be some time for questions after the readings, so I'll come back on at that time and field those via the chat here on the Zoom. But keep that in mind, and I hope that we'd love to hear from you if you do have questions. So think about that as the readings are happening, and if there's anything that's on your mind related to the readings. And so now I'm lucky enough to be able to introduce Mai Der Vang and Dunya Mikhail. I'll introduce them both now at the outset, and then they'll read continuously in turn. So with Mai Der reading first, and then Dunya. So, and I'm struck by a line from the author's note of Dunya Mikhail's book in her feminine sign, quote, "To capture the poem in two lives is to mirror my exile with all of its risks and possibilities." And I think that both Dunya Mikhail and Mai Der Vang write poems that embrace risk and possibility, that speak across many lives, a plurality of voice, address, aesthetic, and language that affects a boundlessness, even as the writings of both Mikhail and Vang are rooted in place, specific place. The poems in Mai Der Vang's Afterland, for instance, range from devastating and attentive reportage to surreal lyricism. The latter is sometimes inspired by folklore and Hmong shamanic beliefs, and it always enacts a dislocation, quote, "a dislodging of our perceptions," according to Juan Felipe Herrera. As with the opening line of her poem, Another Heaven, quote, "I am but atoms of old passengers." Vang's poems are assemblages of diffused matter, strikingly recombined in recursive atoms of narrative, idea, and image, the writing of a garment, geography of the body, catalogs of, quote, "everything that ever was so deeply tenuous." And considering Dunya Mikhail's Twitter bio, I don't have the sense, quote, "I don't have the sense of exile in a traditional way, maybe because I am actually a bird." And her poems, like avian trajectories, are borderless. They're poems that travel and trace, quote, "their migration to places that are neither homelands nor exiles." Through language, sometimes aphoristic, sometimes expansive, always searching, Mikhail creates poetic worlds where meaning itself is fluid, porous, illimitable, and the constructs of geographic and temporal space are collapsed, as with her use of the word neologism T/HERE, being at once there and here. Both Vang and Mikhail speak to and through multiple valences of experience, personal, political, ancestral, in order to articulate unimaginable loss. At the same time, they energize language to speak across geographies and generations and upend received ideas about how language can and should mean. With vigor and resilience, they speak at once of and beyond the exiles they articulate. To borrow from Mai Der Vang, quote, "Ask me to build our temples, so rooted, so stone, we won't ever die out." It's my incredible pleasure to welcome, reading in this order, Mai Der Vang and Dunya Mikhail. Thanks.
Thanks so much for that introduction, Mike. Really appreciate your thoughts there. Thank you to all of you for being here this evening, to Woodland Pattern, to the staff there who continue to do such great work to support access to literature and community engagement with literature, and then also to my fellow reader tonight, Dunya. It's an honor to read alongside you. So thank you again, all of you, and I'm really excited to read some poems for you all this evening. I'm going to read a few poems from my first book, Afterland, and then a couple of new ones from my forthcoming collection, Yellow Rain. So I'll start with a poem in Afterland, and this is a poem that for me is about finding that sense of home, toward home. Say a rooster is my mother. Say there is a coffin in its body that can only fit my skull. Say I find a lighthouse burning in a cave. Smoke above the field of broken feathers. I'm flightless, slipping windward without a bridge to home. Say the oven is a bone room. Say the rock bleeds out its boiling eye. I don't know where I'm from, but say my feet endure because I must have come from somewhere. Say the oryx is a creature made of windows. I look inside its ear and I see its spirit. 1,000 needles thread the ends of my hair, and I'm trembling in the storm. So, so I'm Hmong, and my parents arrived to this country as refugees from Laos following the U.S. conflict in Vietnam and in Laos, and originally they were resettled in the Twin Cities, but then they moved to California, obviously because it was much warmer, and they could deal with the climate a little bit better than the Twin Cities and sort of the Midwest where it's freezing. And they also moved to California because they had heard about the mountains there, and that there were mountains, and that you could for them it was sort of a nostalgia in being able to be near a landscape that was so similar to home. And on top of that, the Hmong culture is rooted in oral tradition, and so the idea of writing is still a relatively new concept, I would say, for a lot of our elders in the community. Not to say that we didn't have a form of poetry, or we do have that, a form of sung poetry, but writing itself. So this next poem explores that, that sort of relationship between writing and finding home in a particular landscape. Original bones. I wander the earliest days when I had a written language. Before 1952, when missionaries in Laos wrote one for me. Before 1959, when a phantom script came to the mother of writing. Before 1986, when I drew the letters of Mai Der. I showed up in southern China a few millennia back, uncooked people led to war. As a child, I once looked up from a farm in Fresno's Valley. So much deeper, the engine echoes in my kicking eardrum. Grayer now, my eyelids gnarl into clouds. There was a time the mountain came to surrender, pressed itself down as my page. All right. And kind of continuing with that too, that sort of conversation about what I was saying for the last poem, this being rooted in an oral tradition, because of that, so much of the culture then gets passed down through storytelling, and also in the clothing, the traditional clothing that we wear. What the women did in the old days, in the ancient days, really, was that they would sew symbols onto our clothing so that we could remember our history. And so just by looking at our clothing, you could see different aspects of Hmong history being retold. And so this next poem, depicts that as best as I could, trying to depict that history of that retelling of the history on our clothing. Cipher song. It's come to this. We hide the stories on our sleeves, patchwork of cotton veins. Scribe them on carriers for sleeping babies, weave our ballads to the sash. Forge paper from our aprons, and our bodies will be books. Learn the language of jackets, the way a pleat commands a line, the way collars unfold as page, sign our names in thread. The footprint of an elephant, snail's shell, ram's horn. When the words burn, all that's left is ash. Okay. So I think I'm going to do one more poem from the book here, the first book, and then I'm going to transition to some newer poems. This next poem, this is a poem where that speaks to me having grown up, and in a family that practiced and still practices shamanism. And so this is sort of a retelling of one of the rituals that we do to honor our ancestors by literally feeding the ancestors. And this poem's called The Spirit Meal. It's been 100 years since their last morsel. No honey on palate, they hunt the living in dreams. Now the dead come to dine in my kitchen. Paper plates line the floor, each offering rice and boiled meat from the hen mother butchered in the garage. Spoons have been dispersed. The ground table is set as though sounding a dinner bell in the hereafter. Father chants, "Come eat," as though they enter in procession to sit at their chosen plate. Father pours a shot of rice wine, incense fills the air. I picture an opened cupboard in the sky where the feeding hand reaches down to find their waiting mouths. They trudge as the famished turtle whose flaccid head is ready to break. Grains and poultry turn molasses on their tongues, dripping as flame syrup off the chin until their filled liquid faces burn away. Okay, so for some newer pieces, so I'm going to be reading poems from a forthcoming collection called Yellow Rain, and this will be out in September. And this particular collection has took me many years to get through, just because I did a lot of archival research and declassified document research for this particular collection. And just to give you a little bit of background and some context, Yellow Rain, which is the title of the collection, is a biological and chemical weapon that was purportedly used against Hmong refugees just after the US wars and Vietnam and Laos. And what was happening was that refugees were showing up into the camps, and they were describing these very strange illnesses. And some of them were also had, some of them also died from it as well. And so this prompted a global investigation into whatever Yellow Rain was, like what was this substance? And so after, many countries got involved in the investigation, there were some scientists in the United States who claimed that it really wasn't a weapon at all. In fact, it was just honeybees defecating. In other words, it was honeybees pooping en masse. But many Hmong people would beg to differ on that. And what makes it even more sort of complicated is that underlying this whole incident was the politics of the Cold War and the animosity between the United States and the former Soviet Union, political interest between the pro-arms and the anti-arms. And so, to make a very long story short, I think the key thing to know is that the Hmong story and the Hmong version of events got lost and muddled in all of that politics. And so this work is about me sort of going back to kind of dig through all of that and to sort of see what I could find and what I could learn from the whole issue, and also really to kind of highlight that Hmong story that got lost in the politics of Yellow Rain. So the first poem that I'm going to read here is called Guide for the Channeling, and it's actually the first poem in the collection as well. And it is kind of sort of a guide in some ways. Guide for the Channeling. Toward a worn legacy of rain, I have been lost down every jungle path, adrift and senseless to split open a cascade of knowing. I have tried with all my limber to keen a credo of justice, shelter those who solace inside graves. I have been boiled in my bladed search, opening with questions of a deserted pain to end with a cemented breath shattered into silk. This is where I am taking you, into a discarded vista blowing forth a silent blaze. Here in sunk villages of the disregarded, here where even the dirt of the land cannot muster against the threat of air. Biomedical, vegetation, munitions unfound, every footprint incarnate. Where highlands tangle their echoes to the ground, a place no matter how remote will always be too near and too much, a reminder of an expired war. Refugees not called as people only to be called the outcome of an event. We are venturing into swell beyond swelling of paperwork and protocol, slips of memo and routing, cable and classified meeting. Here is the talk. Biological weapon, yellow spots, apiary blame for decades to wane and cold filed. Believe me, as a torch of this wandering, that I have been digging within the origins of redaction. Believe where I am sending you. I have been shoveling upside down, and now my eyes stagger, my hands ache, my legs becoming hunter, my back a raging shadow. I have been gardening myself into this remembrance. Okay, so I think I'm gonna do a few more, just a couple more before we turn it over to Dunya. Is that okay, Mike? Just a couple, my timing was okay?
Oh yeah, more and more, yeah, definitely.
So what really lied at the heart of the Yellow Rain issue was that you couldn't really prove that it happened, but that you couldn't prove that it didn't happen necessarily either. And that sort of became the complex sort of balance of like, well, what's the truth, if such a truth can even exist, right? As to whether Yellow Rain happened or it didn't. And so this next poem explores that, right? That delicate balance between whether it happened or it didn't happen. And the poem is preceded by like several epigraphs, which I won't read. And these are epigraphs that I pulled from many of the documents, but I will read one or two of the epigraphs. But just to kind of give you a sense of like how much that was such a big part of the issue and how much it creates this this lack of being able to come to terms with whatever it is, because you couldn't even say it happened, and then you couldn't even say that it didn't happen. And so this next poem is called "We Can't Confirm Yellow Rain Happened. We Can't Confirm It Didn't." Whereas the group could not state that these allegations had been proven, nevertheless, it could not disregard the circumstantial evidence suggestive of the possible use of some sort of toxic chemical substance. Cable from the US mission of the United Nations Chemical Weapons Expert Team, New York, to the Secretary of State, December 1st, 1982. And I'll read one more epigraph to give you another sense of that. Unless the data are assessed in the context of all the relevant data, they are at best inconclusive and at worst misleading. Memo from the Armed Forces Medical Intelligence Center to the CBW Use Committee, May 14th, 1986. We've reached an impasse. Flawed Scytherism in the nightfall chanting rumors we will fail. Crash ourselves beyond the caution of saintly balm, expert bounding between what we know and what they've told. We can sell you this much fact. These people forever canceled out in a perpetual chasm of in-between, immortal vacillation of now and never, never there nor here, dead nor alive, accepted nor rejected, fled nor home. We don't have the means to give up the absolute, too much drains at stake to ratify our own absurdity, announce our verdict of confusion. We cannot plan the uninvited, but to blend dichotomies of truth, brain-drowsed, junked out, crude to concede. We, an impressive debacle. Here lies the ashes of our sanity. Okay, I think I'll do I'll do one more poem here, and let's see. This one I think it's when I was thinking about writing, and it's just for anything and everything and that ever goes missing, whether it's people or the things that we hold dear, right? Vigil for the missing. On my most nocturnal days, the icebergs stop listening to me. They shift their sails away from my breathing. They tell me I am not made of mirrors, but from a wolf that slept in a grave and gave birth to a sunrise. She is the fruit that formed me, the dense coat of silk shadowing me out of the ice. Sometimes I dream in the voice of another empire, and I see its feet slink through the crosshairs, clipping around shells and splinters of trapped fires. Its ballroom caves rippling out murmurings of the lost ones, despair modeling the dark as small searchlights. Lost ones who linger through a solar rage, I know your pain lives cardinal. Love spills from your hallucinations. Once a child whispered into me, such sorrow can only be followed by a decade of snow. I crawled into the sky and wept a puddle of sweet laurel until I bled at the ankles, until grandmother called, come in from the winter. Thank you all so much for listening to me read. And now I'm love to turn it over to my fellow reader, Dunya.
Thank you, Mai Der. This was wonderful, and I really enjoyed your reading, and especially your displaying history in the details. Is fascinating, even in the sleeves, that there's history, which will stay in my mind. I will, well, thank you, and thank you everybody, Woodland, and for everybody who attended for this. I appreciate this opportunity and to know more about Mai Der poetry, and as a person also, and the Woodland is all this is lovely. I will probably I will read this short poem. Is untitled, is not in a book yet, and it is selected by the New York Public Library as a pocket poem. So I love how they called it pocket poem, and they had it with illustration from their museum archive, which was a lovely card. Looks like a card, but it's I'll start with it. The cage owner reminds the sparrow, life outside is inferno. One day the sparrow flies away, and there in the heights, overlooking the ruins of the world, the sparrow discovers the cage owner was right. It sings about the ruins, a beautiful song with no walls. And I'll read some from my the newest book, In Her Feminine Sign, came out in 2019 from New Directions. The title, In Her Feminine Sign, as I mentioned yesterday, the original title in Arabic, Al-Ghariba Bita'iha al-Marbuta, meaning the stranger in her tied circle, which in Arabic we have a symbol called tied circle, is really like a circle tied like that at the end of the words to make feminine words, because everything has gender in Arabic. But I, of course, changed the into something make more sense in English. So I called it In Her Feminine Sign, because that's a feminine symbol. So I'll start with, I will read that poem, The Stranger in Her Feminine Sign. Everything has gender in Arabic. History is male. Fiction is female. Dream is male. Wish is female. Feminine words are followed by a circle with 2 dots over it. They call this symbol the tied circle, knotted with wishes, which come true only when forgotten or replaced by the wishes of others. In the town of tired wishes, people feel great anticipation because a stranger will arrive today in her feminine sign. Someone says he saw her two dots glittering, refuting another's vision of a cat's eyes hunting in darkness. So scary, he says, how the moon hides in her red circle. Everyone is busy today, listing wishes on pieces of paper they will give to the wind. When the stranger finds them on her way, she'll collect them and adorn them to her circle, tossing off some old wishes to make space for the new. They say the dropped ones will come true. The stranger's lateness worries those who wait. Someone says she's searching for a word to complete a special sentence, the gift she'll bring to town. Another wonders if she seeks a verb or a noun and offers to find her. A third warns that the stranger may turn him with one touch into a flower that blooms for only an instant before it withers and dies, her circle throbbing with songs that cause sadness and elation and something so obscure no one has a name for it. Will she complete a verb or a noun phrase, or go solo, a word complete on its own, they wonder. When they finally hear footsteps, they know the stranger must be near. Make sure the gate is open, they remind one another. They hear clinking, a bracelet, a chain. I read another poem is based on a real person, Eva. And so Eva, the title is Eva, whose shadow is a swan. And Eva is, I want to tell you a little bit background about Eva because I miss her. She's in Sweden, she's a Swedish woman. And she was, when I was in Baghdad, I was working for the Baghdad Observer. That time she came from Sweden as a journalist to cover the war with Iran. We had the Iraq-Iran war. And while she was there covering, as a journalist, she wanted to meet some Iraqi writers, including myself. So after the interview she made, she asked me if I would accompany her to Babylon. And this is ancient site, in Iraq. It has ruins, ancient ruins. And she was so excited about these ruins. For me, it was just a boring place because we see ruins every day from the war and all that. And but she picked a stone and she was excited, and we became friends. And since then, every year in Christmas, I receive a card from Eva. And then 3 years ago, I went to London for a poetry reading. She surprised me. She came all the way from Sweden and just to show me around in London. And she knows I have no sense of directions. And Eva, she's in her 90s. She's 90 years old and she's very sharp. I would get very lost without her in London. And that she told me that she still keeps that stone that she picked from Babylon. And I was moved, and I wrote this poem after that visit to London. So I will read. I know I ruined the poem. I told you everything. It's in the poem already. And if this was a reading in Iraq, they would be so upset, the audience. If you talk about the poem, that's like insulting. They hate that. They don't want you to talk at all about the poem. They would interrupt you and say, read the poem, they would say. So, but in America, I know it's kind of is accepted. And sometimes even people like to hear the stories behind. So I don't know. Eva, if I ruined it or not, but it's okay. There's a repetition now of what I said. Eva, whose shadow is a swan. The day we met in Babylon, for me to interpret her, Eva found a pocket stone she'd later add to her collection of stones from different cities she kept in a glass bowl. We strolled roadsides piled with rocks blasted from bridges and buildings, now bent and cratered. Yet I like to think that I like to think that stone might have predated the fall of Babylon, when people spoke one language. I liked Eva's musical tone. She said, I'm from Stockholm, home to no war for 200 years. I'm from Baghdad, I replied, a city we call the home of peace, though war has lived in it for 200 years. We exchanged postcards for 30 years before my East and her West met in London, our friendship needing no umbrellas in the rain. I waited for her impatiently, but hid on a whim behind a pillar, admiring her poise as she approached and scanned the passers-by like Noah in search of the ark. A woman nearly 90, so beautiful, her shadow a swan, a goddess who found her lost universe in the last minute. She hiked an island mountain on the way to our meeting and bought a CD of fairy music for me. When I followed up with a farewell call, I learned she lost her hearing. Right, so I can hear you. She must have read my lips. The concert we attended in the rain must have seemed like lightning without thunder. When I received her postcard, I can't read her handwriting, but plan to search the dictionary of Babylon for her words and decipher the line drawn by time. I will read this poem, 100 Years of Sleep. I don't want to be the princess. I only want to be her sleep for 100 years. I want to skip the problems of the 21st century. Water pollution, killing virus, nuclear war, capsized boats that carry immigrants away from their homelands. I may miss important inventions and new songs and weekends when people go out on their dates followed by one moon. I may open my eyes for a moment to take a glimpse of the universe and its beauty and then close them again. But what if my loved ones surrounded me and whispered in my ear one by one? I would wake up, of course. Yesterday, I promised to read My Poem Will Not Save You, so I'm gonna read it now, keep my promise. Remember the toddler lying face down on the sand and the waves gently receding from his body as if a forgotten dream. My poem will not turn him into his back and lift him up to his feet so he can run into a familiar lap like before. I'm sorry, my poem will not block the shells when they fall into a sleeping town, will not stop the buildings from collapsing around their residents, will not pick up the broken leg flower from under the shrapnel, will not raise the dead. My poem will not defuse the bomb in the public square. It will soon explode where the girl insists that her father buy her gum. My poem will not rush them to leave the place and ride the car that will just miss the explosion. Many mistakes in life will not be corrected by my poem. Questions will not be answered. I'm sorry, my poem will not save you. My poem cannot return all of your losses, not even some of them. And those who went far away, my poem won't know how to bring them back to their lovers. I'm sorry, I don't know why the birds sing during their crossings over our ruins. Their songs will not save us, although in the chilliest times, they keep us warm. And when we need to touch the soul to know it's not dead, their songs give us that touch. I wrote this, it's crazy. I don't know how to draw. I don't know, it doesn't show here. And these drawings like scribbles in there's another book, The Iraqi Nights. Also, I scribbled those. And here also, I don't know how to draw. And because I don't know how to draw, that worked because these tablets, the reason I did that, I was imitating those ancient Sumerian tablets, which is the first communication in history. And I'm from Mesopotamia. And I was thinking how this, like they were expressing their ideas and feelings and everything, emotions through drawings on the tablets, inscribing these. That's how their language started. There were no letters. No, that was, so I was thinking if I were in that time, I wanted to express these poems, these short poems I call tablets, how would I express them? So I express them in addition to writing in these drawings, but I don't know how to draw, but these are supposed to be primitive. So that worked because not everybody knew how to draw at that time. So I just assumed I was just one Sumerian, another Sumerian person. So I will read some of these poems. I will not read the numbers. I just small pauses between them instead of numbers. I don't care under which sky, just sing your song till the end. Like the turtle, I walk everywhere with my home on my back. The spider makes a home outside itself. It doesn't call it exile. No, I'm not bored of you. The moon too appears every day. The lanterns know the value of night and are more patient than the stars. They stay until morning. Those colorful flowers over the mass graves are the dead's last words. The earth is so simple. You can explain it with a tear or a laugh. The earth is so complicated. You need a tear or a laugh to explain it. The map of Iraq looks like a mitten, and so does the map of Michigan, a match I made by chance. If you can't save people, at least don't hate them. Women running barefoot, behind them stars falling from the sky. We are not upset when the grass dies. We know it will come back in a season or two. The dead don't come back, but they appear every time in the greenness of the grass. The truth lands like a kiss, sometimes like a mosquito, sometimes like a lantern. Back when there was no language, they walked until sunset, carrying red leaves like words to remember. So many of them died under stars that don't know their names. I am haunted by the melody of a forgotten song, sung while two hands tied my shoelaces into a ribbon and waved me goodbye to school. The seasons change colors and you come and go. What color is your departure? I think I'm out of time. I think I should stop. Yeah, right? I think it's no? Am I not? I'll end then with, you know how, okay, one, then I'll end with one. We'll end with it. The alarm is saying you shut up, but it's okay. So now I'll end with, you know how that's tablets, and this is another tablet, the new one, the tablets that we use. And the poem is What We Carry to Mars. It's kind of in the prose, long kind of like lines, not like the other ones. This new tablet you carry contains text and images of what's remembered from Earth. You saved your life in the cloud, and now you are traveling with it to Mars. You can't open a window on the way to take a look at Mother Earth, not even a last look. Like any other mother, she will not stop spinning around the sun, though her residents never really feel her movement. Mothers are circles with cracks. As Leon Cohen said, there is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. Save that in the words as vitamins for the soul file. It doesn't matter if you forget something. You may simply go to the cloud and download your memories. Sometimes you smile, I know. Sometimes you want to forget. We are all refugees. We move on feeling that we've left something behind. You don't exactly know what you miss. Far away is a relative word. The theory of place we've been discussing for a lifetime will have another meaning over there. Time will not be the same either. I see you in a year of light means see you later. The hour will have no minutes. There will be just dust in a tube, and we can flip the tube over to see when we can return, just like this. How many departures can you put up with? Are we safe there, you wonder? Are we safe here? Forget safety. Here you have plants and no time to water them. There you have time and no plants to water. Here, Earth has gravity, so you don't fly, and at the end you return to Mother Earth. The Sumerians said, returning to the mother, when they meant freedom. See my poem Amargya for further possibilities. On Mars, where do they bury the dead? There is less gravity there and thus enough to fly. When you fly, cages become the last expectation. There and there is slashed with T slash, so it's both here, there, simple warmth, which is the difference between living and alive. Mars looks like a half-baked cake. No God yet to punish the sinners or console the sad ones. The new planet is almost empty, but the word empty is relative too. The sky looks empty, but it is stuffed with stories we invented for the angels and devils. Our grandmothers too used to stuff our pillows with feathers and stories they had invented for us. You are not sure where you should start from. So much war and so much love. You pack it all up and parachute to the new place like any immigrant with dreams and chimeras and dying stars. A free dandelion, you are carried away in the wind, while in the background you hear songs from the time of Earth, from someone's tablet. Is it nostalgia or accident? You're not sure. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you both so much. That
Yes.
was wonderful. Really appreciate it, and glad to hear that work from Yellow Rain, Mai Der too. So, okay, we do, as promised, now have time for questions. If you would like to pose a question in the chat, that would be great. Otherwise, also, if you know, we're an intimate and familiar group, so you can also feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question as they come to you. So, does anybody have any questions? And think about it. I'd also like to ask a question, which is, I wonder if we might at some point before we leave for the evening, have maybe another poem from each of you. Is that possible? An encore at some point, say, to close things out after the questions. Then you can think about what poem you might want to read, or if that's okay. Anyway. But yeah, if anybody has any questions, thoughts.
I second that question.
Yeah, the more poems question.
Is anyone here a writer also? Now I'm posing the questions.
Yeah, Peter says, yes, lots of poets. It's true. There are a lot of quiet
That's
poets in the room. Yeah. And from Liat, I've been thinking about the poem as a country of exiles from your talk yesterday. Interesting, thanks.
I don't know if there was any like follow-ups. It's just been like bouncing in my head of like when Dunya said something about when people read the poem, they kind of have to enter into that experience, which then kind of turns them into having to learn your language or your world and that relationship. I don't know, after the conversation, if there were any other further thoughts that you guys had on, if that sparked more things afterwards. And if not, that's okay too.
Yeah. Well, thank you for still remembering that about how readers add their own meanings and their discoveries, and that this way they immigrate to our poem and we become the native for a moment. But I want to add something that remember as a quote from a wonderful poet and critic, Edward Hirsch. He said something that stayed in my mind. He said, poems are incomplete until readers find them. And I don't know if Mai Der wants to add something to this thought. Or
Yeah, I do remember when we discussed this yesterday, and I think you said this, Dunya. You said poetry as homeland, too, right? That there's a way in which we find that sense, that place that we can't really find here in our current reality, but we find that in the poem, or we find that in the act of writing the poem, in the space that we create on the page because of the poem. And so for me, I would say poetry as homeland as well. And also thinking about poetry then, like what you're offering here too, Liat, if I'm saying your name correctly, too, is this idea that the poem also becomes a space in which you can invite others to partake in it, right? To enter into that world. And I would say that if people are entering into the world of my poems, like I wish I had a guidebook for how to do that, right? Because my poems are, I think I've shared before that people are, what's going on in your poem, Mai Der, and so I love when people are willing to want to enter that space with me, to no matter how weird it is, or no matter how unusual the imagery might be, or no matter how off the syntax is, there's something beautiful in the disruption that happens too, of what we think about when we engage with language. And any reader who wants to explore that world with me, you're absolutely invited into my world, into these poems. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
And what are you studying? Are you a student? Yeah.
Me? Not specifically in a place, but I'm a student of many things.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, what made you attend? Do you love poetry just like for the sake of it?
Yes, I do. But, and I think that thing is,
That's an unconditional love.
yeah. Yeah. And the homeland, like somewhere where you can just really feel, if it's in your own, but then also in others, you find this place that's not exactly, even if you don't understand it, it's like something familiar.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it makes sense. You make, what you call it, like, if I want to philosophize it, like semantic relation, that it may make sense or not make sense, which doesn't really matter for us, that we sometimes we make sense of something or not, but it makes us relate to some prior experience that we don't necessarily need to analyze or understand fully, but we feel that. if you agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Liat. And then, oh, Swar, are you raising your hand? Was that intentional?
Hello.
Hi.
Uh, Sorry, my computer is being a bit weird. Okay. Uh, thank you, Mai Der and Dunya, for your lovely reading. I'm sad I missed the discussion yesterday, but I sort of have a question about language, and perhaps it also relates to Liat's question regarding exile and homecoming. So does perhaps bilingualism or multilingualism or a translation as a way of writing also somehow figure into your experiences as poets, perhaps coming to the page?
Mm-hmm. So about translation, yeah, I mean, it is, I want to tell you something. In Arabic, there is a saying about translation of poetry, because a lot of our people in the back home in the Arab world think it's not a good idea to translate poetry. I mean, especially Arabic poetry is, classical poetry is hard to translate. Don't say it's impossible, but they feel it is a lot of it lost. So there's a saying in Arabic, which is interesting. They say, before I say the saying, the Persian carpet, because it's in the saying, so we need to understand it. The Persian carpet is so special. It's wonderful, beautiful, and on the, it has those images and motifs. And it is one of the most expensive carpets because it's so wonderful. But then when you turn it, those images fade in the back. They are fade, and they just like faded image. So they say, there's a saying that say, translating poetry is like turning a Persian carpet to the other side. That's what they think of, which is, I don't agree with so much. I mean, 100%. Sometimes it's not only what's lost, what's gained, especially with modern poetry. I mean, which is because Arabic poetry is classical, is very musical, but the modern poetry, I write modern poetry, it's a kind of, it's not doesn't depend 100% on the language or the music. It's more other things. But I had, experience with both working with other translators, as also the experience of working on it myself, like just feeling how giving the two languages on the same page, I found communication can happen between the two languages. I can claim is democratic, and that I was the relation between the two languages is just like I felt the two poems, the two versions in two languages, like true lovers, where what I mean by that, true lovers, is that they don't impose themselves on each other. They just develop together. So I felt that, like the poem in my page, from right to left, left to right, they were, really growing together and helping each other be better, each one of them. Even my original, I mean, I can, don't say I'm bragging, but my Arabic language is wonderful, not like the English, don't judge me by the English, but like, even though I'm good in my original language, I felt, oh, it was really weak sometimes, the poem in Arabic. I felt the weak lines and the weak phrases and things through translation. It was like, it helped me diagnose where those problems are in the original. So it's not always the problem of translation. Sometimes it's a problem in the original text. And for me, it's made me more sensitive, thinking more deeply about my original language when I do the translation. So it is, for me, it's like additional revision or editing, like additional process of working on the poem. So it became like part of working on the poem. So I call it writing it twice rather than translation. And I don't know, Maider, if is when you say Hmong, I was wondering, is it that so yeah, your parents, what language is? I'm sorry, I'm ignorant about maybe so many languages, but can you give us an idea about what your ancestors' language they speak and how is the system, if you happen to?
Yeah, no, and absolutely, you're not ignorant at all. I mean, I think it's such a, you know, the Hmong language is it's still fairly unknown, but we speak Hmong, so that's the language, and the Hmong language is the as I was saying earlier, the language was, the culture itself is rooted in oral traditions, and so the act of writing is still fairly new. And in fact, the written system for the Hmong language, the Romanized popular alphabet that we use today to write the Hmong language, wasn't developed until about the 1950s by missionaries, no less, who were in Laos and needed to communicate with the villagers. And so that was how the written form came into existence, the written system for the language. But the language is very tonal. So, when you're speaking it, the slight shift of a tone in how you, sort of how you kind of, raise or lower your pitch will then impact the entire meaning of the word. And there's one poem, actually, Mother of People Without Script, in which that's something that I was really intrigued by, was just the tonal variations and the tonal textures. And the other thing that also really occurred to me in the act of writing, like I read and I write in Hmong, but I haven't attempted full translations in Hmong, nor full translations of Hmong into English and vice versa. I would like to do that at some point. But I think that one thing that I take away from the experience of having been raised in a household where Hmong is my first language, I grew up hearing and being immersed within Hmong sounds as a child, is that, I began to realize that sonically there was something that I was sort of unconsciously taking in as I grew up hearing the Hmong language. And that was these monosyllabic beats. I would hear them because Hmong, most Hmong words are monosyllables. Even my name, Mai Der, are 2 monosyllables, and so the words are primarily monosyllabic in nature. And so when I was writing a lot of the poems for Afterland, I didn't realize this, but I was writing a lot of monosyllables. Not because I was that's all I can hear. No, but I think it was something that had been sort of intuitively and unconsciously sort of ingrained and embedded into my thinking about language and sound. And so I really gravitated towards these sort of monosyllabic sort of cadences in my work. And that's something that I think stands out in how I sort of engage with language of the poem, thinking about the sound, and seeing the ways that there are nuances between how I hear English and then how I hear Hmong, and trying to find ways to create that nuance too in my own poems.
This is fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
How this monosyllabic come to your, and then you discover it came from your, what you were hearing in your home, and this oral, and the oral, it reminds me of Aramaic, how I speak with my parents and grandparents. And Aramaic is oral only. It's like only in churches they read and write, but it is kind of this oral tradition of peoples, and especially the ancient cultures and even the newer ones. But this is fascinating, all how this influences the writing. Even.
Yeah, definitely is. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. I see that
I can
Peter.
ask
Yeah,
you.
hey, Peter. All right.
I just wrote it out so I wouldn't sound like weird when anyway. So I'm thinking about how early in the reading, well, just the title of the book, In Her Feminine Sign, and how those masculine, feminine, neuter case endings from our source languages or our home languages. In my experience with like Eastern Slavic languages, like how I think of a table as masculine or a knife as feminine, and just how that kind of carries over into English and other languages. And do you experience that in your own poetry? That kind of the echo of that genderifying of words.
Yeah, I mean, in the Arabic language, it's everything is either masculine or feminine, and then even the grammar and the words, the adjectives, they have to follow that gender. So you have to, there is no it. And so if we think of poetry, poetry is masculine, but poem is feminine, by the way, just for your information. And I don't know, I don't think of the words this way when we speak. We don't think of them as really, unless sometimes certain, you know, for it happens sometimes, but not, it became natural and part of it, just to know that it is masculine or feminine, and use the rest of sentence accordingly, especially adjectives, but we don't think of the gender of the language when we just speak it that much, even though, for example, everything like a moon is masculine, but sun is feminine. Everything, when you say table is in your language, you said is masculine, and in Arabic is feminine, and so on. So it's interesting though. But there's a symbol, because I teach Arabic language, so I teach the symbol to how the students will change. For example, a teacher, masculine, male or female teacher, to change that into female, they add that symbol, that circle with two dots over the circle, to make it feminine. But the reason I started thinking about this feminine ending and why we call it tied, it's like I didn't think about that before. After I wrote my book, The Beekeeper, the nonfiction, and it became more conscious or thinking about the women issues, it came to my mind. And this, In Her Feminine Sign, it was on kind of a response to that other experience of the beekeeper of I don't know if you by chance know about that book, but it is a nonfiction about women that were stolen in Iraq and then survived, escaped ISIS, and I wrote about their experience. So that's what made me think of the tied circle, because their hands were tied like this by chance.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Peter. Tuning in from Woodland Patterns. There's the book center back there if you look close. Does anybody else have any other questions?
I was actually wondering if Dunya would speak a bit more about The Beekeeper. I really admire that book, and it has such a difficult balance of witness and mediation, and at the same time reflection on your own life. And I remember there's a wonderful bit where you reflect on your relationship with your grandmother. But yeah, I would love to hear more a bit, if you wouldn't mind, about how you wrote it.
Well, it needs a whole new presentation, but this is the book. I have it here by me by chance, because tomorrow I have presentation about it by noon, invited by Women Forum in Detroit. This is the book, and The Beekeeper, Rescuing the Stolen Women of Iraq. I don't know how to make, my problem, I don't know how to make long things short. Mai Der is good about doing that, which I need to learn. But so the beekeeper is one of those people who also escaped with his family in 2014. That ISIS, controlled the area north of Iraq, the villages, and they stole women and they killed some men. 6,000 women were stolen, and half of them survived, escaped. And one of the heroes was a beekeeper, originally a beekeeper, who left his bees aside and used his knowledge of the roads and friendship with Syrian merchants. He was selling honey to them to convince a group, instead of smuggling cigarettes, to smuggle women back home. And the stories of women, and this experience made me go back to Iraq after 20 years of absence. I never went back, but because for this, I lost my mind and wanted to really hear a voice that survived. And I went there to the camps, to the mass graves, to the Lalish temple, and I met women who escaped, and they told me their stories. Some of them spoke in Kurdish language, which I don't understand, but I understood their pain fluently. And I learned about Abdullah's story, the beekeeper, who he rescued some of these women. So I try to have their voices heard. And in my new novel is in Arabic. This is it. I have it here. Just also I have something about it, but this is not in English yet, but I'm excited about it. It is inspired by the story, one of the women's story, but is written as a novel this time, because I felt I still had this call inside me to kind of have it as I had it as nonfiction, because it's so strange that I said it's stranger than fiction. But then I discovered a village there that is fascinating. It's like legend, like myth. This village I didn't know about. Even I lived in Iraq 30 years of my life, but I didn't know about this isolated village, which is not even on the map. So I had it in the novel also, but yeah, I talk too much. Don't know how to make it in a breathe. That's how I write books. As I said, it's because a small, maybe it's a short thing, I make it long.
Thank you. And thanks, Sawar, again for the question. And I see Peter, don't forget about the encore and Woodland Pattern saying yes. I wonder if that might be possible, if it might be possible to hear a parting poem from each of you before we close out this two-night evening series of events.
Do you want a poem, Micah?
Yeah, I'm thinking about what poem to read.
Yeah, I good that you are flexible. You go first, because then I will think half the time.
Yeah. Maybe I'll do the one with the Hmong in the tone, so you can hear the tones, and this one is so, like, as I've been sharing, the Hmong people didn't have a written language until about the 1950s, but there's a really fascinating story about a Hmong man named Shang Luyang, and he was a farmer, and he was uneducated, and he lived during the time of the war, and the story goes that he when he went to bed at night, he had these very interesting visions of a particular language for the Hmong people, a written script. And so he began to sort of like take note of that and began to sort of study this script that was coming to him in his visions. And so he started to teach people this particular script, and it's called the Baha, I think is how you might pronounce it, the Baha script. And that script, there are still some people who know that script today, but as it happens, Shang Luyang would be then assassinated during the war. because of beliefs that what he was trying to do was communicate with communists. And so that's the story that sort of underlies this poem. And as I said, you're going to hear different Hmong words in this, and different tones of Hmong words. And then the translation of those words are immediately after that. And yes, Milwaukee is the 4th largest. Interesting. I didn't know it's the 4th largest, but it's a really interesting fact there. Mother of people without script. You swear the twin spirits taught you to write. At night, you climbed the leaves to hear the gods. Catch in the throat, hollow breath. Ba is not ba, is not ba. Blossom is not blanket, is not help. Ndu is not ndu, is not ndu. Edge is not sky, is not wet. On sheet of bamboo with indigo branch, to tsia is not the tsia. To scissor is not the cold. The obsidian mask will make its own sleep. Leave behind the silver your body won't shed. Now you are Nindal, who was once a young farmer, scrawling in secret toward the triggering day. When they could take no more, when all that you had was given, you lined your grave with paper. Thank you all so much for listening.
Thank you. This is, I love the sounds also of this. So wonderful. Real wonderful. I know what to read because in the last poem I read, I said that I referred to a poem called Amarje as a referred to it in the poem. So I think I should read it since I referred to it. And Amarje is a Sumerian word that means return to the mother and also means freedom at the same time. Amarje. Scattered like us, the Sumerian letters, freedom is inscribed Amarje, meaning returning to the mother. This then is how the map grew borders. The birds don't know it yet, leaving their droppings wherever they want. Their songs like exiles might pass by anywhere. There are no borders in paradise, neither spoils nor victors. Paradise is Amarje, no victors at all. There are no borders in hell, no losses, no demons. Hell is Amarje, no demons at all. Amarje might be a moon that follows us home, a shadow that stumbles on its true self, a bead from a bracelet, a secret a tree keeps for centuries. Maybe it's what crowds the prisoner's heart, or what shines around the pebbles mixed with drops of water among the rocks. What steeps out from the dead into our dreams. Maybe it's a flower thrown into the air and hangs there alone, a flower that will live and die without us. Amarje, that's how we return to the mother, strangers from strangers. And so, like all of you, we breathe Amarje. And before we shed our first tears, Amarje is what we weep. Thank you very much, all of you. Thank you. And thank you, Mai Der, also for sharing with me the space.
Thank you for reading that last poem. I love it. That's one of my favorites.
Yeah, thank you both for everything and for the encore. Those are actually both of those poems are poems I was hoping we'd hear tonight. So that's great that you closed with them. And thanks everyone for being here and for the thoughtful questions. And this has just been amazing. It's really been an incredible pleasure to host you both. Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Good night. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you.